a 9-figure fortune, a sprawling Hamptons estate, and a closet filled with couture gowns. This was Genevieve Hayes's life. From the outside, her marriage to the heir of the Davenport empire. Preston Davenport III was a modern fairy tale, but when the fairy tale ended, she found herself on a cold courtroom bench facing the man she once loved as he smirked across the aisle. He was certain she would walk away with nothing, all thanks to a single piece of paper, an ironclad prenuptial agreement designed to protect his family's immense wealth. What he didn't know, what his army of high-powered lawyers didn't know, was that Genevieve had a secret of her own. A secret about the very signature on that document that would blow the case and the entire Davenport dynasty wide open. The air in the Davenport penthouse on Park Avenue was always the same, chilled to a precise 68 degrees and smelling faintly of white lilies and money. For 7 years, Genevieve Hayes had called this glass-walled palace home. She had learned to navigate its silent, cavernous rooms, to smile at the appropriate charity galas, and to overlook the increasingly frequent nights her husband, Preston Davenport III, came home smelling of expensive whiskey and a perfume that wasn't hers. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition. Publicly, they were the golden couple. Preston, impossibly handsome with his lazy smile and eyes the color of a summer sky, was the charismatic scion of Davenport Industries, a global logistics behemoth. Genevieve, with her quiet elegance and art history degree, was the perfect accessory. Beautiful, intelligent, but never so much as to overshadow him. She ran the family's philanthropic foundation, a role that was both a passion and a gilded leash, keeping her occupied and safely within the family's sphere of influence. The cracks at first were hairline fractures, a forgotten anniversary, a string of late nights at the office that coincided with photos of him on gossip sites, leaving a trendy Soho club with a rotating cast of models. He would always apologize, not with sincerity, but with gifts. A Cartier bracelet, a weekend trip to St. Bart's on the family jet. He wasn't apologizing for his actions. He was paying a fee to restore the peace. The fissure finally broke open on a Tuesday. There was no grand explosion, no thrown vase or tearful confrontation. It was a quiet, cold realization. Preston had been in Aspen for a boys' ski trip for 4 days. Genevieve, checking the foundation's accounts online, noticed a charge from the corporate card assigned to Preston. It wasn't for a ski lift or a fancy dinner. It was a $50 to $1,000 charge from a jeweler in Las Vegas. A quick, sick-to-her-stomach search on Instagram confirmed it. A 22-year-old influencer was showing off a new, breathtakingly expensive diamond necklace. The caption read, "Vegas treats me so well, feeling like the luckiest girl in the world." She had tagged the hotel. The same hotel Preston was supposedly not at. That was it. The accumulation of 1,000 small betrayals solidified into a single, unbearable truth. The love was gone. The respect was gone. All that remained was the performance. When she called her best friend Samantha, her voice was unnervingly calm. "I'm doing it, Sam. I'm filing." Sam, ever the pragmatist, asked the question Genevieve had been dreading. "What about the prenup, Jen? You know what his father is like." Ah, the prenup. She remembered the day vividly. Just a month before the lavish wedding, she had been summoned to the office of Lawrence Davenport, Preston's formidable father. It wasn't a request. Lawrence didn't request. He commanded. His office was a testament to power, dark mahogany, a wall of windows overlooking the financial district, a silence so profound you could hear the leather on his chair creak. He had slid the thick document across the desk. "A formality, Genevieve," he'd said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "The family has a legacy to protect. This isn't about you or Preston. It's about the generations to come. It ensures there are no misunderstandings down the line." She had felt small, like a child being lectured. Preston wasn't there. He was tied up in a meeting, a convenient excuse that had become his standard refrain. She, a 24-year-old art student completely overwhelmed by the scale of the Davenport world, had felt the immense pressure to be agreeable, to prove she wasn't the gold digger the tabloids were already whispering she was. She had signed where Lawrence had pointed her hand, trembling slightly. Now, 7 years later, that document was the weapon Preston intended to use to leave her destitute. The divorce proceedings began with brutal efficiency. Preston hired Gregory Thorne, a lawyer whose reputation was as sharp and merciless as his tailored suits. Their opening salvo was an offer so insulting it was laughable, a one-time payment of $100,000 and the relinquishment of all claims to any marital property. The cars, the art, the jewelry, all of it, they argued, belonged to the Davenport family trust, not Preston, and was therefore protected. "It's a joke, Jenna," her lawyer Anya Sharma had said, her dark eyes flashing with indignation. Anya was the opposite of Thorne. She was calm, empathetic, but with a spine of steel Genevieve had come to rely on. "They're trying to bully you into submission." The first preliminary hearing was set. Genevieve walked into the New York County Courthouse, feeling like her skin was 2 sizes too small. The harsh fluorescent lights were a world away from the soft, flattering glow of the chandeliers she was used to. She wore a simple navy dress, her only jewelry the wedding band she hadn't yet been able to take off. Across the room, Preston sat next to Thorne, whispering and laughing. He caught her eye and gave her a pitying smirk. It was the look of a man who held all the cards, a man who believed her, completely and utterly beaten. He thought this was just another business transaction he was destined to win. Another problem his father's money and power could make disappear. He saw her not as the woman who had shared his bed for 7 years, who had held his hand at his mother's funeral, who had tried desperately to build a real life inside their gilded cage, but as a minor inconvenience. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Marion Hawes, called the court to order. Gregory Thorne rose, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "Your Honor," he began, "this should be a very straightforward matter. My client, Mr. Davenport, and the petitioner, Ms. Hayes, entered into a comprehensive and legally binding prenuptial agreement on May the 12th, 2018. This document, which we have submitted as Exhibit A, clearly outlines the separation of assets. It is for all intents and purposes ironclad. Ms. Hayes is entitled to the modest settlement stipulated within, and nothing more. We are here today simply to ask the court to enforce the terms of the contract both parties willingly signed." He placed a copy on the table with a theatrical thud. Genevieve felt her stomach plummet. The room seemed to tilt. This was it. The end. Preston's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of untouchable victory. He was already planning his celebration dinner. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, broken only by the rustle of papers as Judge Hawes put on her reading glasses to peer at the document. Gregory Thorne stood with the posture of a man who had already won. He had handled dozens of high-profile divorces for New York's elite. To him, this was just another Tuesday, another tearful wife being reminded of the cold, hard reality of contract law. Genevieve felt a wave of nausea. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was unjust. 7 years of her life of supporting Preston's career, of managing his family's public image through the foundation of being the stable force in his chaotic life, all to be erased by a signature she'd made under duress and emotional manipulation. She looked at Anya, whose face remained a mask of professional calm. There was no panic in her eyes, just a steady, unnerving focus. "Ms. Sharma," Judge Hawes said, her voice dry. "Your response to Mr. Thorne's assertion, it appears on its face to be a standard, albeit complex, prenuptial agreement." Anya Sharma rose gracefully. She was shorter than Thorne, but she commanded the space in front of her with an entirely different kind of energy, not brute force, but precision. "Your Honor," Anya began, her voice clear and even. "We do not dispute that my client, Ms. Hayes, signed a document on the date in question. We also do not dispute the contents of that document as presented by opposing counsel." A confused murmur rippled through the small public gallery. Thorne's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Preston leaned forward, whispering to his lawyer. "What is she doing?" Thorne just shook his head slightly, trying to project confidence. If they weren't disputing the contract, what was there to argue about? Anya let the silence hang in the air for a calculated moment before continuing. "My client was young, she was in love, and she was under immense pressure from a very powerful family to, as they put it, not cause any trouble. She signed it, believing it was a prerequisite for the marriage she so deeply desired." Anya paused, turning her gaze from the judge to look directly at Preston. "What we are here to contest, Your Honor, is not the existence of the prenup. We are here to contest its fundamental validity." Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Its validity? Your Honor, with all due respect, Ms. Sharma seems to be grasping at straws. The document was drafted by the finest legal minds at Sullivan and Cromwell. It was reviewed and signed. What possible grounds could there be to invalidate it? Did her pen run out of ink?" A few of the Davenport cronies in the back snickered. Preston looked relieved again, his arrogance flooding back. This was just a desperate last-ditch effort. Judge Hawes looked unimpressed by Thorne's theatrics. "Ms. Sharma, get to the point. On what grounds are you claiming this document is invalid?" Anya took a slow breath, her gaze locking with the judge's. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of secret, painstaking work. "A prenuptial agreement. Your Honor, is a contract between two consenting parties who are about to enter into a marriage. Its entire legal standing rests on the principle that the two individuals getting married, and only those two individuals, agree to its terms regarding their own assets and futures." She took a step closer to the judge's bench. "The document Mr. Thorne has presented as Exhibit A does indeed bear the signature of my client, Genevieve Hayes." She paused again, letting the weight of her next words gather. "However, it does not bear the signature of the other party to the marriage. It is not signed by Preston Davenport III." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Thorne's jaw literally dropped. Preston shot up from his seat. "What, that's a lie? I signed it, I was there." "Sit down, Mr. Davenport," Judge Hawes barked, banging her gavel once. Preston sank back into his chair, his face now a mask of pure, bewildered rage. Thorne, recovering quickly, sputtered, "Your Honor, this is an absurd and outrageous allegation. Of course my client signed it. We have the executed copy right here." He snatched the document from the table and brandished it as if it were a holy relic. Anya Sharma remained perfectly still. "Your Honor, we ask that you examine the signature on the line designated for Preston Davenport III. We have retained a forensic document examiner, Dr. Albert Reed, who is prepared to testify that the signature on that line, while belonging to a member of the Davenport family, is not, in fact, that of Preston Davenport. Her voice dropped, becoming icily precise. It is the signature of his father, Lawrence Davenport. The bombshell landed with the force of a physical explosion. The room erupted. Reporters in the back were frantically typing into their phones. Preston looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face pale and slack. He turned to his lawyer, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and panic. "What is she talking about? Dad!" Gregory Thorne stared at the document in his hand, his professional poise utterly shattered. He looked from the paper to Preston, then back to the paper. For the first time in his long, storied career, he was completely and utterly speechless. He had built his entire case on the unshakable foundation of this ironclad agreement, never once thinking to question the authenticity of a signature from a client he'd represented for years. Judge Hawes's face was a thundercloud. "Ms. Sharma," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Are you telling this court that you have evidence that the groom's father signed a prenuptial agreement on his son's behalf?" "Yes, Your Honor," Anya said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "We have the document. We have the expert witness. And we have the truth." Genevieve finally looked over at Preston. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the dawning, horrified look of a man who was no longer in control. A man who was beginning to understand that the puppet strings he thought he was pulling were actually attached to him, and his father had just let them all go slack. The gilded cage had just vanished, and he was in a free fall. The judge declared a 48-hour recess for the defense to get their house in order, a judicial understatement of epic proportions. The chaos that erupted outside the courtroom was a media-feeding frenzy. But inside Genevieve's mind, the courtroom's chaos faded away, replaced by the ghost of a memory from 7 years prior, a memory she and Anya had painstakingly reconstructed. Flashback, May 2018. The city was in the full bloom of spring. Genevieve was 24, dizzy with love and the sheer, overwhelming velocity of her new life. Meeting Preston had been a whirlwind. She was an intern at a small art gallery in Chelsea, and he'd come in to purchase a painting for his father's birthday. He was impossibly charming, disarmingly funny, and he'd looked at her not like she was a part of the scenery, but like she was the only masterpiece in the room. Their courtship was the stuff of movies. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons, surprise trips to Paris, front row seats at Fashion Week. He showered her with affection and attention, making her feel like the center of the universe. She was aware of his family's immense wealth, but she truly believed he was different. He seemed to chafe under the weight of the Davenport name, often complaining about his father's suffocating control. The red flags were there, but she had chosen to see them as endearing quirks. His boyish irresponsibility. He once chartered a yacht for a weekend party and forgot to pay the final bill, leaving his father's office to clean up the $1 million mess. He had a tendency to drink too much at society events, his charming wit curdling into boorish arrogance. Each time, Lawrence Davenport would handle it. A quiet payment, a phone call to a newspaper editor, a donation to a charity to smooth things over. Genevieve saw it as a father protecting his son. She didn't yet see it as a CEO managing a volatile asset. The proposal was perfect on a balcony in Lake Como, under a sky full of stars. The ring was a flawless 8-carat diamond that felt heavier than a stone. The wedding planning began immediately, a massive production orchestrated not by them, but by Lawrence's army of assistants. Genevieve felt more like a spectator than a bride. Then came the summons to Lawrence's office. "Preston is in meetings all day in Delaware," Lawrence had explained over the phone, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I need you to come by my office. We have some final details to discuss." When she arrived, the atmosphere was clinical. Lawrence wasn't smiling. He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his vast desk, the city skyline looming behind him like a conquered territory. "Genevieve," he began, foregoing any pleasantries, "we're all very excited for the wedding. You make my son happy." It sounded less like a compliment and more like a statement of fact from a quarterly report. He slid the navy blue folder across the desk. "This is the prenuptial agreement. Our lawyers have drafted it. It's standard procedure for our family." Her heart sank. She and Preston had never discussed a prenup. "Oh, I don't think it's not a reflection on you." Lawrence cut in smoothly, misinterpreting her hesitation as a prelude to an objection. "It is about protecting a century-old legacy. Davenport Industries is more than a company. It's an institution. This document ensures that institution remains secure, regardless of what life throws at any of us." She opened the folder. It was dozens of pages of dense legalese, a language she couldn't comprehend. She saw figures with so many zeros, they looked like typos. "Shouldn't Preston be here for this?" she asked, her voice small. "Shouldn't I have a lawyer look at this?" Lawrence gave a paternal, dismissive chuckle. "Of course you are free to do that. But honestly, it would be an unnecessary expense and frankly a bit adversarial. Don't you think? This isn't a negotiation. It is a condition of the union, a gesture of goodwill to show that you are marrying Preston for who he is, not for his trust fund. We are a family, Genevieve. We take care of things internally." He was masterful. He framed it as a test of her love and loyalty, making the act of seeking legal counsel seem like an act of betrayal. "Where is Preston?" she asked again, feeling a growing unease. "He should be the one talking to me about this." Lawrence's expression tightened for a split second, a micro-expression of profound annoyance before smoothing over again. "As I said, he's tied up, but he is fully aware and in complete agreement. In fact, he asked me to handle this for him. He finds these financial matters tedious. He wanted to spare you the awkwardness." He was lying. Genevieve knew instinctively that he was lying. Preston didn't find financial matters tedious. He was just monumentally irresponsible with them. He wasn't sparing her awkwardness. He was avoiding a confrontation he knew he would lose. He was a coward, and his father was his enabler. But she was 24, and in love, and the wedding was a month away. To refuse was to detonate a bomb in the middle of her life. "Okay," she whispered, feeling defeated. "Where do I sign?" He smiled, a cold, thin-lipped expression of victory. He turned the document to the final page, where 2 signature lines were marked with yellow tabs. One for her, one for Preston Davenport III. "Just here," he said, pointing to her line. She picked up the heavy gold-plated pen on his desk and signed her name. Her signature looked shaky foreign. Then the critical moment happened. The moment that 7 years later would become the linchpin of her entire case. She pushed the document back toward him. "Preston needs to sign it." "Of course," Lawrence said. He picked up the pen. "I'll have it sent over to his office in Delaware immediately for his signature, and a fully executed copy will be delivered to you." He started to close the folder, but then he paused, looking at her, and then he did something utterly bizarre. With a look of weary impatience, as if dealing with a minor but necessary chore. He said, "You know what? Let's just get this done." He opened the folder again, uncapped the pen, and with a swift, practiced motion, he signed the line marked Preston Davenport III. Genevieve stared, confused. "What are you doing?" That's Preston's line." Lawrence didn't even look up. He blotted the ink with a rocker blotter. "My son has given me enduring power of attorney over all his legal and financial matters. His signature, my signature, legally it's the same thing. I sign multi-million-dollar contracts on his behalf every week. This is just paperwork. It's cleaner this way. No couriers, no delays. It's done." He said it with such casual authority, such absolute conviction, that she, in her naivety, believed him. Why would this titan of industry lie about something so fundamental? He made it sound like he was signing a permission slip. To her, a power of attorney sounded like an unbreakable legal bond. If he could sign for a corporate acquisition, surely he could sign this "I'll have a copy made for you," he said, standing up the meeting clearly over. "Thank you for being so sensible, Genevieve. I knew you were a smart girl." She left the office in a daze. A few days later, a pristine, bound copy of the prenup arrived at her apartment via messenger. She glanced at the signature page. There it was, her trembling signature, and beneath it, a sharp, angular, authoritative signature on Preston's line. She'd never paid close attention to Preston's actual signature. It was usually an illegible scrawl on a restaurant check, so she had no reason to doubt it wasn't his. She filed the document away and tried to forget the cold, transactional feeling it had left in her gut. She focused on the wedding. Present day. "He thought he was above the law," Anya said, pacing in her office. Genevieve sat on the couch, a cup of tea untouched in her hands. Lawrence Davenport lives in a world where his will becomes reality. In corporate law, a power of attorney can be that powerful. But a prenuptial agreement is different. It's personal. It's an antenuptial contract, meaning before the wedding. It requires the personal consent and signature of the two people getting married. A father cannot consent to marriage on his son's behalf, and he cannot sign away his son's marital rights for him. It fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the contract. "I never would have known," Genevieve said quietly. "I just accepted it. When I first brought you the papers, I didn't even remember it was him who signed. It was Anya's meticulous nature that had unearthed the truth. Weeks ago, she had asked for every single document Genevieve had. In a box of old papers, she found a birthday card from Preston from their first year together. Anya had looked at the scrawled signature inside the card, then at the sharp, decisive signature on the prenup. They weren't just different. They were polar opposites. That's when she'd asked Genevieve to recount, in painstaking detail, the day she signed the prenup. And as Genevieve spoke, the memory suppressed for years came flooding back. The cold office, the father's impatience, the swift, arrogant stroke of the pen. The ghost of that signature was about to become very, very real. To understand why Lawrence Davenport would commit such a stunning act of hubris, one had to understand the man himself. Lawrence was not merely rich, he was a creator and protector of wealth on a dynastic scale. He had inherited a respectable logistics company from his father, and through decades of ruthless acquisitions and visionary gambles, had forged it into the global titan that was Davenport Industries. He moved markets with a single phone call and considered politicians to be temporary employees. His worldview was simple. The world was divided into assets and liabilities. His company, his fortune, and his family name were assets to be protected at all costs. Everything else, from business competitors to tragically his own son, was a variable to be managed. Preston Davenport III was Lawrence's greatest and most frustrating variable. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed the family name, all valuable attributes for a public-facing heir. But he was also weak-willed, undisciplined, and possessed a talent for self-destructive behavior that terrified his father. Lawrence had spent Preston's entire adult life cleaning up his messes, paying off gambling debts from illicit poker games in Macau, settling lawsuits from fender benders in his ridiculously expensive sports cars, and extricating him from entanglements with women who saw a walking, talking ATM. The final straw had come 5 years before Preston even met Genevieve. At 25, Preston, in a fit of pique after Lawrence cut his allowance, had taken a company speedboat out with some friends and, blind drunk, crashed it into a pier in Miami, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage and injuring a dock worker. The scandal was immense. It was after this incident that Lawrence Davenport took a drastic, legally binding step. He didn't just want to control Preston's allowance. He wanted to control his entire financial and legal life. With a team of the best lawyers money could buy, he went to court and, citing Preston's pattern of recklessness and inability to manage his own affairs, established a limited but powerful financial conservatorship. He also had Preston sign an enduring power of attorney, giving Lawrence sweeping authority over his contracts, investments, and legal obligations. To the world, it was spun as a strategic restructuring of family assets. To Preston, it was the ultimate humiliation. He was the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, yet he couldn't buy a car or sign a lease without his father's signature co-signing the transaction. He was, in a legal sense, a highly compensated ward of the state, with his father acting as the warden. Lawrence controlled the trust that paid Preston's lavish lifestyle, and Lawrence had the legal right to sign contracts for him. This was the context in which he'd viewed the prenuptial agreement. To him, it wasn't a sacred pact between two lovers. It was a financial contract designed to protect the primary asset, the family fortune, from a potential liability, a future ex-wife. In his mind, signing on Preston's behalf was not fraud. It was efficiency. It was simply one more document in a long line of documents he was legally empowered to execute for his wayward son. It was this mindset, this absolute belief in his own authority, that had led to his fatal error. He had applied the cold logic of corporate governance to the deeply personal territory of matrimonial law. During the 48-hour recess, the Davenport machine went into overdrive. But for the first time, it wasn't attacking an external threat. It was imploding. Gregory Thorne was in a full-blown panic. He had personally assured Preston and Lawrence that the prenup was unbreachable. Now he was facing the possibility of disbarment for submitting a potentially fraudulent document to the court, a document his own clients had given him. The scene in Lawrence Davenport's office was apoplectic. "How could you be so stupid?" Lawrence roared at Thorne, his usual granite composure shattered. "You're paid millions of dollars a year to be meticulous. You didn't think to verify a signature." "You gave me the document," Thorne shouted back, his fear making him bold. "You told me it was executed. How was I to know you signed it yourself? You have power of attorney. I assumed it was a legitimate, if unusual, execution of that power." Preston, meanwhile, was a ghost. He sat on a plush leather sofa staring into space. His entire identity was built on the illusion of being a playboy prince, a master of his own destiny. That illusion had been ripped away in a public courtroom. He wasn't the powerful heir. He was a child whose father still signed his paperwork. The smirk he'd given Genevieve now seemed pathetic, a final flickering ember of a fire that had been extinguished. He was humiliated, not because he might lose money, but because his powerlessness had been exposed to the world. Lawrence, seeing the uselessness of yelling at Thorne, turned his cold fury on his son. "And you couldn't even be bothered to show up and sign your own damned prenup. You were probably off chasing some tramp in Vegas while I was securing your future. You wanted to do it." Preston finally snapped, his voice cracking. "You always want to handle everything. You never trusted me with anything, so you can't blame me when I don't act like a man." The battle lines were drawn not between husband and wife, but between father and son. Lawrence, ever the strategist, quickly moved past anger and into damage control. His first move was an attempt at intimidation. He had one of his security consultants, a polite term for a private investigator with questionable ethics, start digging into Genevieve's life. They were looking for any dirt they could find. A past relationship, a college mistake, anything they could use to smear her in the press and pressure her into dropping the case. His second move was to try and buy his way out. He had Thorne contact Anya Sharma with a new settlement offer. Anya met Genevieve at a small, quiet coffee shop, far from their usual haunts. "They're rattled," Anya said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "Deeply rattled." The offer was for $5 million, a lump sum tax-free in exchange for signing an ironclad NDA, and walking away validating the original prenup in the process. For a moment, Genevieve was tempted. $5 million was life-changing money. It was safety. It was freedom. It meant no more courtrooms, no more media scrutiny, no more fighting. She could disappear and start a new life. Sam, who had come with her for support, squeezed her hand under the table. "That's a lot of money, Jen." But then Genevieve thought about Lawrence's cold, dismissive smile. She thought about Preston's cruel smirk in the courtroom. This wasn't just about money anymore. They weren't offering this out of generosity. They were offering it to cover up their wrongdoing, to purchase her silence. Accepting it would mean validating their belief that everything and everyone had a price. It would mean letting them win. "What do you think will happen if we fight?" Genevieve asked Anya. "If we fight and the judge invalidates the prenup," Anya explained, "then the court will proceed as if there were no prenup at all. Your settlement would be determined by New York state law, based on the length of the marriage, the standard of living you were accustomed to, and Preston's actual wealth, or rather the wealth you both enjoyed from the family trust. Given their lifestyle, we're not talking about $5 million. We're talking about a figure potentially 10 times that, or more." The number was staggering, almost abstract. But that wasn't the deciding factor. The deciding factor was the look in Anya's eyes, a look that said, "We can win this." Genevieve pushed the paper back across the table. "Tell them no," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Tell them we'll see them in court." She was no longer the scared 24-year-old in Lawrence Davenport's office. The web he had spun to trap her was now trapping him, and she was the one pulling on the strands. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. The room was packed with journalists spilling out into the hallway. The Davenport family's dirty laundry was about to be aired, and everyone wanted a front-row seat. Gregory Thorne looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, weary demeanor. Preston sat beside him, looking smaller in his expensive suit. his eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table in front of him. Lawrence Davenport was also present, sitting in the front row of the public gallery. He wasn't there to support his son. He was there to watch over his investment, his face an unreadable mask of stoic fury. Anya Sharma was the picture of composure. She began by formally calling her expert witness, Dr. Albert Reed, to the stand. Dr. Reed was a man in his late 60s with a neat bow tie and an air of academic certainty. He was one of the most respected forensic document examiners in the country. Anya projected 2 documents onto the large screens in the courtroom. One was the signature page of the prenuptial agreement. The other was the birthday card Preston had written to Genevieve years ago. "Dr. Reed," Anya began, "could you please describe to the court the process you used to analyze these 2 signatures?" For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Reed gave a masterclass in handwriting analysis. He talked about letter formation, baseline alignment, pen pressure, and stroke sequencing. He pointed out the garland connections in Preston's known signature, a lazy, looping scrawl, and compared them to the sharp, angular connections in the signature on the prenup. The signature on the birthday card, what we're calling the known sample. Dr. Reed explained, pointing with a laser, is fluid written quickly with a rightward slant and low pen pressure in the upstrokes. It is consistent with dozens of other samples of Preston Davenport III's signature we've examined from checks and other personal documents. He then directed the laser to the prenup. The signature on the contested document is fundamentally different. It is written deliberately with heavy, consistent pressure. The letter formations are sharp, almost calligraphic. The T crossing is high and firm, whereas in Mr. Davenport's known signature, it is often a quick trailing stroke. They are, in my expert opinion, written by 2 different hands. Anya let that sink in. "And have you formed an opinion on who wrote the signature on the prenuptial agreement?" "Yes," Dr. Reed said. "We were also provided with numerous authenticated samples of Mr. Lawrence Davenport's signature from corporate filings. The signature on the prenuptial agreement is to a scientific certainty a match for Lawrence Davenport." A wave of gasps and frantic typing filled the room. Thorne's objection was weak. "Your Honor, this proves nothing. My client's father had power of attorney." Anya was ready for that. "Your Honor, the defense seems to be clinging to the idea of a power of attorney as a magic wand that makes this all disappear. But we'd like to explore the circumstances under which this document was signed." She called her next witness. It wasn't Genevieve. It was a woman named Maria Flores, Lawrence Davenport's former executive assistant, who had retired 2 years ago. The Davenports' private investigator had missed her. Anya's had not. Ms. Flores, a nervous but dignified woman in her early 70s, took the stand. "Ms. Flores," Anya asked gently, "you were Mr. Lawrence Davenport's assistant for over 30 years, correct?" "Yes." "Do you recall a meeting between Mr. Davenport and Genevieve Hayes in May of 2018? "I do. I scheduled it." "And was Preston Davenport III present at that meeting?" "No, he was not." "Do you know where he was?" Ms. Flores hesitated, looking toward Lawrence, whose glare could have melted steel. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Davenport told Ms. Hayes that his son was in a business meeting in Delaware. That was not true." Thorne shot to his feet. "Objection hearsay." "Sustained," the judge said. "Ms. Flores, only testify to what you know directly." Anya rephrased. "What did your duties entail regarding Preston Davenport's schedule and expenses that week?" "I had access to all his corporate credit card statements and travel itineraries. It was my job to reconcile them for Mr. Lawrence. And according to those records, where was Preston Davenport on the day the prenuptial agreement was signed in New York? Miss Flores looked the judge in the eye. He was at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. He had been there for 3 days. The records showed charges for over $20,000 at the high-limit poker tables and a charge from a nightclub for bottle service. The dam broke. The carefully constructed image of the responsible heir in a Delaware meeting was shattered. Preston sank even lower in his chair, his face burning with shame. He wasn't just a puppet. He was a reckless, lying puppet. But Anya wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge, "the defense's argument rests on the validity of a power of attorney, but a power of attorney cannot be used to commit fraud. Lawrence Davenport didn't just sign on his son's behalf. He actively misrepresented his son's whereabouts and willingness to participate. He created a fiction to coerce a young woman into signing away her rights, then took a shortcut born of pure arrogance, believing the rules didn't apply to him." She turned to face the defense table, her voice ringing with clarity. "A prenuptial agreement is perhaps the most personal contract a person can sign. It contemplates the potential end of a marriage. It requires full financial disclosure, independent counsel, and most importantly, the willing and direct consent of the two people whose lives it will govern. What we have here is not a valid contract. We have a document born of deception and signed by proxy. It is legally and morally worthless." The unraveling was complete. Gregory Thorne sat down defeated. He had no counter-argument. His entire case, built on the document Lawrence had handed him, had been dismantled piece by piece. There was no cross-examination that could fix this. Preston finally looked up, his eyes meeting Genevieve's across the courtroom. There was no anger left in them, only a hollowed-out emptiness. He truly saw her for the first time in years. Not as an accessory or an inconvenience, but as the woman whose trust he and his father had casually betrayed. In that moment, he knew he had lost more than money. He had lost the last shred of his own dignity. The smirk was a distant memory, replaced by the stark, humiliating truth. The courtroom fallout was a Category 5 hurricane. Lawrence Davenport, for the first time in his public life, looked shaken. He had built an empire on the principles of control and leverage, and in one disastrous morning, he had lost control of the narrative, his family, and his legal footing. That evening, the remaining members of Team Davenport Lawrence, a deflated Preston, and a frantic Gregory Thorne, convened in the family's war room, a soundproofed study in the penthouse. The mood was grim. "They're going to throw the prenup out," Thorne stated flatly, all pretense gone. "The judge is furious. The optics are a catastrophe. A lying father, a gambling son, a coerced bride. It's a media nightmare." Lawrence slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. "So we fight dirtier, find something on her. Anything. I don't care what it costs. Everyone has a secret." This was the Davenport way. When legal tactics failed, they resorted to character assassination. They immediately put their private investigator on a singular mission: destroy Genevieve Hayes's reputation. Within days, the smear campaign began. A notorious gossip blog suddenly ran an exclusive story. The headline screamed, "Gold Digger's Plot Exposed, Prenup Bride's Secret Past," with married art professor. The article was a vile tapestry of half-truths and outright lies, twisting a mentorship Genevieve had in college with a respected elderly professor into a sordid affair. They included photos of her, from college looking young and happy, now cast in a sinister light. Genevieve felt like she'd been physically assaulted. She woke up to her phone buzzing with notifications, her face plastered all over the internet next to libidinous headlines. Reporters were camped outside her apartment building. "It's them," she said to Sam, her voice trembling with rage. "This is what they do. They can't win honestly, so they try to ruin you." Sam wrapped her in a hug. "Don't let them get to you, Jen. Anyone who knows you knows this is garbage." But the mud was sticking. The comments online were vicious. She was a schemer, a harlot, an opportunist. The Davenports were experts at manipulating public opinion, and they were painting her as the villain in her own story. Anya Sharma, however, was unfazed. "This is a good sign," she told Genevieve over the phone. "A good sign, Anya. They're calling me a whore on the internet." "It's a sign of desperation. Genevieve, it's the last desperate act of a cornered animal. They know they've lost in court, so they're trying to win in the court of public opinion. Don't respond. Don't make a statement. We stay focused on the law." The pressure was immense. Genevieve felt herself starting to fray. The temptation of that $5 million offer came creeping back not as a prize, but as an escape hatch from the public humiliation. Then came the next move from the Davenports. It was more subtle, but far more menacing. Lawrence, through a series of shell corporations, began making inquiries about the small art gallery where Genevieve had dreamed of working again. He put pressure on the gallery's landlord, hinting that his lease might not be renewed. He had a major collector, a man who owed him a favor, pull his collection from their upcoming show. He was trying to suffocate her future, to show her that even if she won in court, his reach was long and he could make her life difficult in 1,000 different ways. This was Lawrence's true power, not the one signature on the prenup, but the web of influence he could cast over the entire city. Preston, meanwhile, was a ghost in the machine. He was caught between his father's vengeful rage and his own dawning sense of guilt. He had loved Genevieve once in his own selfish, immature way. He knew the story about her professor was a lie. He knew this scorched earth campaign was wrong. He did something he hadn't done in a decade. He acted without his father's permission. He got Genevieve's new private cell number from a mutual acquaintance and called her. She answered warily. "Hello. Jenna, it's me." Silence. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," Preston stammered. "About the article. It's not right. It's my father. He's what, Preston?" Genevieve's voice was ice. "Out of control. Or is he just being himself, the man you've allowed to run your life since the day I met you?" "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "I know. I messed up. I messed everything up." "Yes, you did," she said. "Is that all?" "My father. He'll never stop," Preston said, a note of warning in his voice. "He'll drag you through hell. Maybe you should just take the money and run. For your own sake." It was a twisted sort of kindness born of weakness. He wasn't telling her to fight for herself. He was telling her to surrender because he was too afraid to stand up to his own father. Hearing the weakness in his voice, the pathetic attempt to help her by advising her to give up had the opposite effect he intended. It galvanized her. All the fear and uncertainty she'd been feeling coalesced into a diamond-hard resolve. She would not be bullied. She would not be smeared. And she would not be scared into submission by a broken man and his monstrous father. "Thank you for the advice, Preston," she said, her voice now devoid of any emotion. "But I'm done running. I'm done being sensible. I'm done doing what the Davenports think is best for me." She hung up the phone. The next day, Anya Sharma filed a motion for sanctions against the Davenports for witness intimidation and launching a malicious public smear campaign intended to influence legal proceedings. She attached sworn affidavits from the art gallery owner and a printout of the gossip blog post tracing its ownership back to a PR firm with long-standing ties to Davenport Industries. The message was clear. The desperate measures had failed. Genevieve Hayes was not backing down. She was fighting back. The final day in court was less a legal battle and more a coronation of the truth. The Davenports' desperate attempts to intimidate and smear Genevieve had backfired spectacularly, earning them a harsh rebuke from Judge Hawes before the proceedings even began. The motion for sanctions was taken under advisement, a clear threat hanging over Lawrence's head. Gregory Thorne's closing argument was a shadow of its former self. He was hamstrung, unable to defend the indefensible. He tried to argue that even if the signature was Lawrence's, the intent of the agreement was clear, and that Genevieve had benefited from the marriage for 7 years. It was a weak, pathetic argument, and everyone in the room knew it. Then Anya Sharma rose for her closing statement. She didn't address the defense table. She spoke directly to the judge, her voice filled with a quiet, righteous power. "Your Honor," she began, "for 7 years, Genevieve Hayes lived in a world where the rules were written by one man, Lawrence Davenport. He is a man accustomed to bending the world to his will, a man for whom contracts are tools. People are assets, and laws are mere suggestions. In his world, his power of attorney is a crown, allowing him to act as king on behalf of a prince who refused to grow up." She paused, letting the words settle. When he placed that prenuptial agreement in front of a young, trusting woman, he wasn't seeking a fair contract. He was demanding fealty. When he lied about his son's whereabouts, he wasn't simplifying paperwork. He was committing fraud. And when he arrogantly signed his own name in place of his son's, he made a fatal miscalculation. He believed that the personal sacred covenant of marriage could be treated like a corporate merger. He was wrong. This case was never about money. Anya continued, her gaze sweeping over Genevieve, then to the judge. It was about dignity. It was about whether the powerful are allowed to write their own rules at the expense of others. It was about the validity of one woman's life partnership and contributions which the Davenport family sought to erase with a fraudulent document and a check for her silence. We ask the court to do what the Davenports never could, to see Genevieve Hayes not as a liability to be managed, but as an equal partner in a dissolved marriage. We ask you to declare their so-called ironclad prenup invalid, and to restore the dignity they tried so hard to take from her. Anya sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Hawes looked down from her bench, her expression stern. She looked at Preston, whose face was ashen. She looked at Lawrence, whose mask of composure was finally cracking, revealing the seething rage beneath. And then she looked at Genevieve, who met her gaze with quiet strength. "I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented in this matter." The judge began, her voice ringing with authority. "It is the finding of this court that the prenuptial agreement, dated May 12, 2018, is null and void." A collective gasp went through the room. A prenuptial agreement is a unique and deeply personal contract. The judge continued, her words a direct rebuke to Lawrence. "Its validity hinges on the signatures of the two parties entering into the marriage. A power of attorney, however broad, cannot substitute for the personal consent required to sign away one's marital rights. To allow such a thing would be to open the door to all manner of contractual mischief and coercion. "Mr. Davenport," she said, looking directly at Lawrence, "you may be a titan in your own boardroom, but in this courtroom you are just a man. And you, sir, are bound by the same laws as everyone else." She then turned to Preston. "And you, Mr. Davenport, a man of your age, and means should be ashamed. Ashamed to have your father fighting your battles, cleaning up your messes and signing your name. Your dereliction of personal responsibility is the primary reason we are all here today." Preston flinched as if he'd been slapped. "The prenuptial agreement is set aside," Judge Hawes declared, her voice final. "This court will proceed with the division of marital assets under the standard equitable distribution laws of the state of New York. A forensic accounting of the marital estate is hereby ordered. This hearing is adjourned." She banged the gavel, and it was over. The aftermath was swift. The media exploded with the story of the invalidated prenup. The Davenport name was dragged through the mud, not by Genevieve, but by their own hubris. Lawrence was humbled in a way no corporate rival had ever managed. His relationship with Preston was shattered beyond repair. Preston, stripped of his father's protection and his own illusions, was forced to confront the empty shell he had become. The court-ordered accounting revealed the true staggering extent of the wealth he had taken for granted. In the end, the settlement awarded to Genevieve was astronomical, a figure that ensured she would be independent for the rest of her life. But as Genevieve walked out of the courthouse past the flashing cameras, the victory didn't feel like a financial windfall. It felt like breathing after being held underwater for 7 years. She hadn't just won a court case. She had won back her name, her story, and her future. The money was just a tool. The freedom was the prize. She was no longer Genevieve Davenport, the society wife. She was Genevieve Hayes, the woman who had faced down an empire and won. In a world that often seems tilted in favor of the rich and powerful, Genevieve Hayes's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the truth is the great equalizer. It wasn't an army of lawyers or a hidden fortune that won her battle. It was a single, undeniable fact that she had the courage to bring into the light. Her journey from a gilded cage to a hard-won freedom shows that resilience and integrity can be more formidable than any dynasty. It's a testament to the idea that no one is above the law, and that fighting for your own dignity is always a battle worth waging. If this story of resilience, justice, and the ultimate triumph of truth captivated you, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that courage can change everything. And for more incredible real-life stories like this, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.